Here in Washington, 6 p.m. in London, 8 p.m. in Jerusalem. Wherever you're watching from around the world, thanks very much for joining us.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We begin with breaking news. President Trump calls out white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups by name after the deadly attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. Here's part of what we heard from the president only moments ago.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal. We are equal.
President, he certainly was under fire for his remarks over the weekend after a car plowed into a crowd, killing a counter demonstrator, injuring 19 or 20 other individuals. He condemned the hatred and bigotry and violence at the time, but he said that wrongdoing was, quote, going on many sides. Many sides. We did not hear that from the president today. No reference to on many sides. Let's get an update on all these late-breaking developments. Our senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta is over at the White House. Our correspondent Brian Todd is in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the suspect in Saturday's attack was in court earlier this morning. Jim Acosta, the president's remarks, very specific. A lot of people are insisting he should have uttered these words on Saturday, would have saved him some criticism.
Would have saved him a lot of trouble, Wolf. I think clearly this was a cleanup job that we saw here at the White House within the last hour. I was in the room as part of the White House TV pool, Wolf, when the president made these remarks. They were scripted. He was reading off of a teleprompter. And I can tell you that as he left the room, reporters were shouting questions at the president as to why he did not make this kind of statement on Saturday, why he did not clearly condemn these groups that he condemned today. He obviously heard those questions as he left the room there, Wolf, but he did not answer those questions. But it is worth noting that, yes, during these remarks, he did condemn those groups by name, called out the KKK, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis. And he also said that justice will be delivered when it comes to the investigation into the death of the woman that was killed in that violence in Charlottesville on Saturday. And he also said, quote unquote, racism is evil. And so I think what we saw reflected in the White House earlier today, Wolf, in the president's statements, is that he is somebody who will listen to criticism. He obviously heard an avalanche of criticism over the weekend. Just about the whole country thought the president did not go far enough in condemning these groups for the violence that happened on Saturday. And so I think what you saw here is the president essentially being cowed into doing the right thing here by members of both parties, people from all walks of life who just thought the president kind of blew it on Saturday, Wolf.
He did announce also, and he pointed out, he had just emerged from a meeting with the Attorney General and the FBI Director that the Department of Justice has opened a civil rights investigation into that deadly car attack. He did not suggest what we've heard from others, that this was also a potential investigation into an act of terror. Are officials over there where you are explaining this difference?
They're not explaining that difference, Wolf, and that did stand out in the president's remarks. The Attorney General this morning was saying that this was going to be looked at as an act of domestic terrorism. Those are not the words that the president used when he made that statement. The other thing we should point out, Wolf, is that on Friday, when the president was making those comments about Kim Jong-un and these escalating tensions with North Korea, the president clearly said there would be a press conference. I think he described it as a big press conference over here at the White House on Monday. That is today. Wolf, if that statement that the president gave inside the White House a few moments ago is his idea of a press conference, that is not a press conference. He did not take questions from us. And I think obviously people are going to be drawing the contrast between how the president is not taking any questions when it comes to the situation in Charlottesville over the weekend, and he was willing, and his willingness to take questions when it comes to Kim Jong-un and the saber rattling that we saw coming out of Bedminster late last week. There was a clear contrast here. The president, at this point, obviously appears to be not in the mood to take these kinds of questions. But there is an opportunity later on this afternoon. He's expected to do another event here at the White House at around 3 o'clock. And at that event, it is possible he will take questions there. So it is possible we'll hear the president answer some of these questions later on today. But Wolf, he was clearly asked why he did not condemn these groups more forcefully on Saturday. He was clearly asked this here at the White House a few moments ago after he made that statement. He simply chose to not answer those questions, Wolf.
All right, let's see if he does later in the day. Thanks very much, Jim Acosta over at the White House. Critics of the president's initial response on Saturday to that attack in Charlottesville, Virginia, say it was a failure of leadership at a very crucial moment. In his remarks only a few moments ago, the president stepped up his criticism of hate groups here in the United States.
To anyone who acted criminally in this weekend's racist violence, you will be held fully accountable. Justice will be delivered. As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And
all right, let's bring in our panel. We have a lot to assess right now. Our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, is with us. Our political director, David Chalian. Our legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, Laura Coates. Our senior political reporter, Nia Malika Henderson. And our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger. Gloria, what do you make of the president's statement about 5 minutes in length? We just heard it at the White House.
Well, look, it's clear to me that the White House and the president are trying to make a reboot. This is not a president who would ever admit that he failed a key leadership test over the weekend when he failed to address these white supremacists directly. I would argue that it's the easiest thing that a president ever has to do is to condemn Nazism. And the president made a point of saying, as you just showed in this clip, as I said on Saturday, just saying that he was making the case that perhaps he believes that he was expanding upon his remarks, which were criticized roundly by every party, members of the Republican Party. So he didn't talk about domestic terrorism. His attorney general did. And this is his effort at rebooting. But I think many times we judge our presidents by how they respond in the moment to these kinds of issues. And I think he failed that test. And this was an effort to say, okay, here's my do-over.
What he did do, David Chalian, today, what he failed to do on Saturday is mention by name the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, white supremacists. That's what people wanted to hear him specifically utter on Saturday. It took him a few days. He finally did it.
Right. Well, to Gloria's point about, as I said on Saturday, he's hoping to blur those lines. That part is not what he said on Saturday. That's why he had to go give this statement today. I mean, here is the thing. That was a really, really strong statement against what happened 3 days after the fact. Imagine a reality, Wolf, if he had given that statement on Saturday, what all of us around this table would be saying about the president's remarks. So give him his credit for finally getting out there and making some very strong remarks. But don't do that without asking the question, what have we learned fundamentally about this president in this episode, about his initial instincts? Can you sort of abdicate the moral authority of the presidency on Saturday and get it back on Monday with a make-up statement? I think that's a question that we should be asking. So while this may now check the boxes for some of his Republican critics in his own party, for others to come out and say, yes, this is what we were looking to hear, I don't think it erases the question of why was this not his initial instinct on Saturday?
And it wasn't his instinct on Saturday. I mean, we have to look at Donald Trump and say, what was his instinct on Saturday to do? His instinct was to say, on both sides.
Right.
And now, as they're trying to reboot, clean it up, whatever you want to call it, this was a very strong statement. And so you have to ask yourselves the question, what is the test of leadership here? The test of leadership is having moral clarity, I believe, in the moment when something like this occurs. Again, you have to say, yes, he gave the right statement days later.
Right. And what did it take to get him there, right? I mean, these days and days of condemnation from Republicans and real outrage at his both sides kind of framing on Saturday. I think also it's incumbent on this president, I think in a way that it hasn't been necessarily on others, to really separate himself from white supremacists, right? If you listen to what white supremacists have said, David Duke, for instance, he essentially has said that he sees Donald Trump as a fellow traveler, as someone who in word and deed articulates the kind of America that white supremacists want to see. So I think it's incumbent upon this president to really disavow them, essentially say that white supremacists and Nazis and neo-Nazis don't speak for him, don't speak for the kind of America he wants to create. This whole idea of America being great, well, neo-Nazis have no part of that America that Donald Trump says he wants to create. He didn't really do that. I think we also have seen from this president when he sees a threat, right? He sees a threat, for instance, in illegal immigrants voting, right? And he set up a commission to look into that. When he talks about illegal immigrants creating crimes, he set up a hotline, right, to look into that. There isn't much policy at this point in terms of addressing this. The DOJ is certainly going to look into it, but in any sort of kind of full-scale investigation into this, we haven't seen that.
You know, Laura, he did say the Department of Justice has now formally opened a civil rights investigation. It didn't say the Department of Justice has opened up a terror investigation. Walk us through, from the legal perspective, the difference.
Well, certainly you have the Civil Rights Division who's coming into play because you have the affiliation of the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, which is saturated with racism and bigotry. So it's a natural inclination to go to the Rights Division. The reason you don't have a terrorism investigation at this point is the code of the U.S. Code actually does define domestic terrorism. And this type of thing does fall under the definition. But it's a bone without meat on it. There is not a hook that you have in the criminal code that will actually be able to carry out at this particular point in time what it looks like for an uncontemplated, unprecedented driving a car into a group of people as a weapon of mass destruction, shall you say. That is the hook they're looking for, which is why they can't legally say it. Colloquially, we all say to ourselves, this is a terrifying act. It's an act of terrorism. It was designed to try to coerce the population, trying to change a government policy. It was done so in a violent way. That's the definition of terrorism. However, in the law, you actually have to have a penalty attached and the elements in place aside from the definition, which is why they're carefully navigating the course right now and talking about it being a racist act as opposed to a terroristic act.
You know, Jim Sciutto, what I don't understand, the Attorney General, the President's National Security Advisor, among others, they've called it an act of terror. We didn't hear that from the President specifically, although his critics are already pointing out that if a Muslim had driven that car into that crowd of individuals, you know he would have called it an act of terror.
No question. And you've seen very quick presidential statements, tweets principally, whenever there is a act of Islamic inspired terrorism abroad. You've seen that less so and sometimes never when you have acts of terrorism, for instance, targeting Muslims. And we've seen the president come under criticism for that. The other point I would make, which is just interesting, is that senior members of the military, in addition to the ones you named, came out very publicly on that very day on Saturday, one being the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson, saying bigotry has no place in this country. Of course, that happens, as you've also heard, senior members of the military challenge the president on his transgender ban, which to this point is still just a tweet. It's not an executive order, but still saying that anyone can serve. And it just struck me that early on in the Trump presidency, the thought had been that the president's generals, in effect, will moderate him on key national security issues, for instance, North Korea. But it's interesting to see those voices pop up on social issues like this, transgender, and now on this. Senior military officials beating the president to the punch, as it were, calling out the KKK, white supremacists, racism explicitly, which took the president himself some time to do.
You know, Gloria, he opened up his statement with a few sentences about how strong the U.S. economy is right now. Right. And then he made the transition to his meeting with the FBI director, the attorney general, and went into the strong statement, a very strong statement, condemning the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazi groups. Some are already saying, why did he need to open up with some rhetoric about the strong economy?
You know, that struck me in the wrong way as well, I must say. I think this is a sort of a moment for the country And the president needs to recognize that, or should recognize that, and start out by saying, look, this is something that needs to be addressed here. And I would argue that you can address the country on this in a separate address and say, this is a moment for us to sit and reflect, and maybe we're going to have a commission, as Nia talks out. Maybe we need to have more public conversation about this. And as your president, let me talk to you about what I'm thinking about and what we are doing. And then at some other point, perhaps later today, talk about trade policy and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think, honestly, this deserved, particularly since it was a very detailed statement, this deserved its own address from the president to the nation.
David Chalian.
And it will be treated that way. I doubt many of us are going to run the economy remarks as it gets repeated over and over again. One thing, Wolf, that I noticed, remember, we came out with a poll last week. A couple of the things that didn't get attention last week that now all of a sudden I went back and looked at. Has Trump changed the stature of the presidency? 55% of Americans says he's lowered it. 17% said he raised it. Will Trump unite the country and not divide it? 35% of Americans told us he will unite the country and not divide it. 61% said he won't. Now, you have to ask yourself, if what happened over this weekend, did he help this standing he has with American voters, or did he hurt it? And I think today's statement is obviously an attempt to make it up, but he's already got such low marks on these kinds of big perceptions of Donald Trump in the presidency, wearing the presidency as an office. And he has so much work to do with the American people. He clearly understood he had to try to correct some of that today.
And if I may, too, the idea of this, having a hate crime investigation is nothing to sneeze at. It's an important thing and an important step to have. It doesn't necessarily replace the semantics of the terrorism aspect of it, but it's important. But the elephant in the room for many people who are affected by this sort of rally and the counter-protest who has died is the idea of, can this Department of Justice effectively carry out a hate crime investigation and a potential conviction or prosecution? And my instinct is, based on the rolling back of a lot of the policies in the Civil Rights Division alone, suggests that perhaps they will not be as adamant or strident in their attempts to do so. That's a point of concern a lot of people will have. And so the idea, Jeff Sessions came out yesterday and talked about the idea of, look, a hate crime investigation is going to be happening, it's domestic terrorism, et cetera, but will he, under his leadership, be able to effectuate the actual, more than semantics, the more than the soapboxing, and be able to carry out an effective investigation?
But you used to work at the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. You were a prosecutor there. Do you not have confidence in the career professionals who will be involved in this investigation?
I have confidence in the career professionals. Unfortunately, many of the career professionals are beholden to the whim of the political appointees who are forced to make the ultimate prosecution decision. And that is where the buck stops. Because it stops there, there can be a great deal of work that's done by the career prosecutors, and they are effective and they are patriots to the core. But if the buck stops in front of the door that says, I have a deaf ear, then not a great deal will change. And that remains to be seen what will happen in this administration.
And this idea of whether or not this was sort of a one-off, and it's going to be treated as such. I think a lot of people, when they saw those crowds gathered there marching in Charlottesville with those torches, you were surprised at the numbers there and the boldness, right? They didn't feel like they needed to wear hoods at that point. So this idea of whether or not this is a more wide-scale problem, and if this administration is in a place and inclined to look at it.
Well, let me just get Jim Sciutto in. Jim, it may be 3 days late. He probably should have done this speech, these words on Saturday, but he does deserve credit for finally coming around and specifically naming those hate groups.
Listen, he did it, and that was a very strongly worded statement. He named KKK white supremacists. He called them repugnant. He said it has no place. They have no place in 21st century America. And he said it very strongly. And I wonder, as I was listening to that statement and seeing the president come out and deliver it, not via tweet, not via just a statement or through unnamed officials, I wonder if we saw the hand of the new chief of staff to some degree, John Kelly there, a military man, perhaps with the authority to tell the president, this is what you have to do. I wonder if that's a sign of his new leadership in that White House.
All right, everybody stay with us. We're going to have a lot more on the breaking news. Jimmy Sciutto, David Chalian, Laura Coates, Nia Malika Henderson, Gloria Borger. All of them will be back. In the meantime, an Ohio man, the key suspect in the Virginia car attack that killed one woman, appeared before a judge via video link a little while ago. The judge denied him bond. When we come back, we'll have details on the suspect, his background. We'll have a live report. Brian Todd is on the scene for us in Charlottesville, Virginia. Much more on the breaking news right after this. He's accused of ramming his car into a crowd of counter-demonstrators in Charlottesville, Virginia, killing one person, injuring 20 others. The suspect, James Alex Fields Jr., 20-year-old, appeared before a judge today. Our correspondent Brian Todd is in Charlottesville for us. Brian, update us on what happened in that courtroom today and what we know about the suspect.
Right, Wolf, there were some charged moments inside and outside the courtroom today. A short time ago, the suspect, James Alex Fields, appeared before Judge Robert Downer here in Charlottesville. The judge read him the charges against him: second-degree murder, malicious wounding, and hit and run. The suspect was video linked in with a video via a video screen from his jail cell in the Albemarle County Jail. So we saw an image of him on the screen rather than a live appearance by him in the courtroom. He was wearing kind of a prison jumpsuit, a striped prison jumpsuit. He looked drawn and subdued. The judge talked to him about the charges. He asked Fields if he could afford an attorney. Fields said he could not afford an attorney. And then an interesting moment, Wolf, the judge said that he had contacted the public defender's office, and the public defender's office told him that a relative of one of the public defenders was involved in Saturday's violence somehow. The judge did not go into specifics about that, but the judge said that because of that, he could not appoint a public defender for James Fields. So he kind of went down a list and picked an attorney named Charles Weber to represent him. And the judge admitted he had not contacted Mr. Weber yet about that. And so he said, this is going to be your attorney. And he also asked Fields where he worked. He said he worked for a company called Securitas in Maumee, Ohio. We have tried to reach people from that company. They have not commented to us so far. But Wolf, it was interesting, the situation regarding the attorneys. Apparently someone in the public defender's office has some kind of a connection to what happened on Saturday, and therefore the judge viewed it as a potential conflict, and so he picked another attorney. We have tried to reach out to that attorney, Charles Weber. We knocked on his door, we've called him, and he has not gotten back to us on this. Interesting information that we've been able to gather over the weekend, Wolf. We've learned from Justice Department officials familiar with the civil rights investigation into this case that officials feel they may have enough evidence to be suspicious that Fields may have been trying to send some kind of a broader message on Saturday when he allegedly struck those people with his car, rather than simply trying to harm people. So that is part of the investigation. Investigators also telling CNN that they are looking into whether he might have had accomplices. We don't know if he had. They were just looking into that at this point. And we do know from records that CNN has pulled that James Fields joined the Army in August of 2015, but then was separated from the service in December of that year for failing to meet training standards. So Wolf, doing a little more digging on the suspect and his court appearance today. There was also a bit of a fracas outside the courthouse today when two men who appeared to be supporters of James Fields started to scream epithets at the media. They were shouted down by counter-protesters, and then they were escorted away by sheriff's deputies, Wolf.
And Brian, very quickly, one of his high school teachers has said publicly that in counseling this young man during his high school years, he was often expressing neo-Nazi views. Is that right?
That is correct, Wolf. This teacher's name is Derek Weimer. He taught Fields for 2 years in high school, taught history to him. He said he had a good rapport with James Fields, but he did say he was made uncomfortable by some of Fields' views, and he said he had an infatuation with Nazis, and that might have informed some of his beliefs, Wolf. And so we're trying to make sure to see if there's maybe a connection between some of those views and maybe his appearance here on Saturday.
Yeah, the president, as we just heard, announcing a full-scale civil rights investigation into this attack. All right, Brian, stand by. I want to bring in John Whitback. He's the chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia. John, thanks very much for coming in. Let me play a key clip of what the president just said.
Okay. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal.
I assume you agree, John. You wish he would have uttered those words, specifically condemning by name those hate groups on Saturday, given all the fallout that's happened since then.
Well, I come at this from a perspective of making Virginia my home. So this was a tremendous weekend for us. I mean, it was a tragedy beyond anything. It's going to be burned in my mind, and I know my counterpart on the Democrat side said this as well. It's something that we're never going to forget as Virginians. And the statement the president made today, the statement of our RNC chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, and the Attorney General, the statements like that meant a lot to Virginians, I think, today, and we appreciate the sentiment. And it's been a tough week for us.
Because a lot of Republicans, your fellow Republicans, have been very critical of the president since Saturday. They're happy he finally did today what he should have done on Saturday, but statement after statement from Republicans coming out saying, name these people, these hate groups, the Nazis, the KKK, name them, don't just gloss over that.
You can't emphatically enough denounce these groups. I mean, you have to be as unequivocal as you can be, and our party has always stood for equal justice, and our Republican elected officials, our party leaders, we've been saying this message all along as Americans, as Virginians. We're united, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents in Virginia right now. It's not a partisan issue, and we're really appreciate the sentiments that have really gone on in our Commonwealth, and it's really wonderful to see everybody coming together.
Because here's what I didn't understand. The president very easily could have at least retweeted what Ivanka Trump, his daughter, tweeted. Yes, she mentioned all those hate groups by name. He didn't do that. He was silent on Twitter all of yesterday. Whenever anybody goes after him, you know how he tweets very, very quickly. How do you explain it took him till today, till the noon hour on Monday, to utter those words?
Well, I think what we saw today in this statement today was really what we would have heard, would have wanted to have heard on Saturday. Yeah. And I think, at one point, during Saturday, I remember watching what unfold in this beautiful city and thinking, this is not Virginia. This is not who we are. This is not Charlottesville. And to have the president come forward and have a lot of our leaders come forward and speak on behalf of Virginia and how much they care about what's going on in our Commonwealth has been really great for us.
Because a lot of those hate group individuals who showed up, the excuse they had was they wanted to protest the dismantling of the Robert E. Lee, the Confederate statue in Charlottesville, Virginia. That may have been their excuse. I don't know how significant that was, but that has become a big issue. Where do you stand? Where does the Republican Party of Virginia stand on that Robert E. Lee statue?
Well, I think, our nominee for governor, Ed Gillespie, has spoken about this, and we support our nominee 100%. But,
what has he said?
Well, he has said that he supports the history of Virginia in all its forms. You can't just eradicate the bad parts of our history by just taking down statues. And I think he's right. And I think one of the things that gets lost in this is these people were not there about a statue. They were there to spread their message of hate and bigotry and racism. And it's up to all of us in Virginia, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to stand against it 100%. And the Republican Party of Virginia does, the RNC does, our president does, and we're not going to tolerate this.
So you don't think that statue should come down?
Well, I don't think the statue should come down, but that's not the issue. I mean, the issue is really we have to stop this hatred. And I feel like we're getting away from that when we talk about things like Confederate statues. I think we really need to be talking about the hatred that was done in Charlottesville, and that's what we're focusing on right now.
John Whitbeck is the chairman of the Republican Party in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
Still ahead, despite President Trump's fiery rhetoric about North Korea, his administration is presenting a rather cool and calm approach to the crisis, at least right now. A closer look at the latest developments when we come back. We're getting a lot of reaction to the breaking news, the reaction to the president's statement on the attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. We're going to have a lot more on that coming up. I'll also speak live with Cornell William Brooks, the former head of the NAACP. But first, other important news we're following right now. In less than 2 hours, President Trump is expected to order an official probe into alleged China trade abuses, such as the theft of intellectual property from U.S. firms. The timing of this could, though, be rather problematic. The U.S. wants China's help to calm the crisis with North Korea, but Beijing has already said publicly that threats could poison its relationship with the United States. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, they are weighing in on North Korea. In the Wall Street Journal, they write this, and let me quote, "We are replacing the failed policy of strategic patience, which expedited the North Korean threat, with a new policy of strategic accountability." Let's discuss this with retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He's a former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, serving under President George W. Bush. Also with us, CNN military and diplomatic analyst, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. General, strategic accountability, strategic patience over all the previous administration clearly failed because the North Koreans, now they have a nuclear capability. Maybe they have as many as 60 nuclear bombs. They might be able soon to miniaturize those bombs, put them on warheads that could launch, that could be attached to intercontinental ballistic missiles. How do you see strategic accountability?
Well, I think the most important thing is if we do come to an agreement with North Korea that there will be a reduction in the number of nuclear weapons or in capability, it must be verifiable, it must be monitored, and there must be consequences.
Do you think that's at all realistic, that North Korea is going to give up its nuclear capability?
Well, as you take a look at the editorial today, they talked about the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That has been something that China has wanted to see for a long time, that the United States has wanted to see. As long as we can convince North Korea that we are not seeking regime change, he can be assured of regime survival. Those are the key elements in this entire deal.
Kim Jong-un, the leader, John, of North Korea, he sees that nuclear capability that they clearly now have as his insurance policy for not winding up like Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, who gave up his nuclear program with the assumption he would survive. Well, where is he now?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, they look at the United States as an existential threat. And we know that's a ridiculous thing, but they view it that way, and they believe it. So they view their program, which is advancing faster than I think people expected it to, as an insurance policy against that very threat. So there's very little incentive right now, if no incentive, for them to want to come to the negotiating table. But what you also saw in that editorial, and what you've seen this administration do, is also try to push on China, because that's really the key here. The path to Pyongyang goes through Beijing. They have to use carrots and sticks. You mentioned in your lead-in, one of the sticks is looking to probe into Chinese trade practices. They also need to look at carrots to try to incentivize China to have a different calculus, because so far they have been willing, China has been willing to accept the nuclear-armed North because they don't want to see a reunified peninsula that's allied to the West.
Because China is the key exporter and importer involving North Korea.
But I also see an opportunity here for China and helping out with the denuclearization. As we've extended our nuclear umbrella within NATO, causing other NATO members to eliminate their nuclear weapons, could China, in fact, give that assurance and that insurance to North Korea, which would allow them to reduce their nuclear weapons or eliminate them entirely?
In other words, what you're suggesting is that China would tell the North Korean government, if you're attacked, you will have the backing of China's nuclear capability?
Exactly as we do in NATO.
You think that's realistic?
I think it's certainly worth exploring. I also think that one of the things worth exploring is what former DNI Director Clapper said here in CNN just a couple days ago, which is maybe you just get to a point where you accept that they are a nuclear power and go from there. And that gets to General Kimmons.
I can tell you the President of the United States says the U.S. will not tolerate nuclear weapons in North Korea.
I understand that, and I think you can still get to denuclearization, but you start from a clean slate, accepting that they have this capability, and then, as the general rightly points out, look at a way to regulate, inspect, and then withdraw the capability. That's another thing that's worth exploring as well.
You think?
I agree.
You think that there's any hope that this current crisis right now can be diffused? Because last week, the North Koreans said by mid-August, that's this week, if they don't get the right words coming out of the United States, they will launch 4 intermediate-range ballistic missiles toward Guam.
Well, I think it's being diffused now. The fact that the United States has not moved any assets any nearer to the North Korean border, it has not ramped up its rhetoric. I think they realize that at this point they have got what they want. They're now going to focus on continued nuclear development, not striking the United States.
But you know there's supposed to be joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises, intensive exercises this month, which the North Koreans hate.
No, they always do, but these exercises, as you heard General Dunford say in Seoul just today, they're important not just about message sending, but about real readiness and deterrence capability. So I think the exercises should go on, and it should be reminding everybody there that these are defensive exercises, not offensive.
All right, we know how the North Koreans always react negatively to these joint exercises. Guys, thanks very much, Mark Kimmon, John Kirby. Appreciate it very much. Just ahead, a major business leader quits the Trump Advisory Council after the president's initial response to the mayhem in Virginia this past weekend. We're going to tell you what the CEO of Merck Pharmaceuticals had to say, and I'll be joined by Cornell William Brooks. He's the immediate past president of the NAACP. We'll get his reaction to the president's very public criticism of hate groups, including the KKK, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, that we just heard only moments ago over at the White House. Much more coming up. Last hour, President Trump tried to make amends for failing to condemn white supremacists by name over the weekend in the Charlottesville, Virginia attack. But for many, the damage is clearly already done. Today, one of the most prominent African-American CEOs, Ken Frazier of Merck Pharmaceuticals, he's quit the president's manufacturing council. And in a statement, Frazier wrote this: America's leaders must honor our fundamental values by clearly rejecting expressions of hatred, bigotry, and group supremacy. President Trump, within minutes, lashed out on Twitter, quote, now that Ken Frazier of Merck Pharma has resigned from the president's manufacturing council, he will have more time to lower rip-off drug prices, close quote. Let's discuss this and more with my next guest, our CNN contributor, former president and CEO of the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks. First, your reaction to Ken Frazier of Merck Pharmaceuticals quitting the president's council.
Well, Ken Frazier is a very well-respected CEO, very well-respected lawyer. For him to take this move, to take this step, is a measure of the frustration, the righteous indignation of many Americans. For him to quit the Manufacturers Council as one of the nation's most prominent business leaders says that what the president failed to do heretofore struck a deep chord in this country, as in a deep chord of disgust. He did the right thing. So
a lot of people are pointing out within minutes the president responded, went after him on Twitter, but it's taken him several days now, since Saturday, Sunday, today's Monday, to formally try to fix what he initially should have said on Saturday. Let me play the clip of what he finally said today.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal.
So what's your reaction?
My reaction is this. Let's note this. The president responded within a nanosecond to Ken Frazier quitting the council as a consequence of his moral failure. But it took him several days for him to call out white nationalists, Klansmen, and white supremacists for their violent conduct in Charlottesville. That is a tragedy. The fact of the matter is, when the White House issued a statement anonymously clarifying what the president should have said but failed to say, it suggested that the president was trying to have his hate cake and eat it too. That is to say, condemn implicitly, obliquely white nationalists without calling them out. So today's statement is certainly an improvement, but it represents the rhetorical minimum. It is not yet the moral maximum until such time as we see responsive policy.
He did announce that the Department of Justice is formally opening up a civil rights investigation into that individual who allegedly took that vehicle as a weapon, went into that crowd, killed that young woman, injured 20 others.
Yes, it's an important step, but let us note this. We commend the president for directing prosecutorial and investigative resources into looking into that particular crime. But to the extent that this defendant was standing in the midst of neo-Nazis, in the midst of white supremacists, to what degree is there a larger crime? The president has not yet spoken to what else happened in Charlottesville. To what degree did this go well beyond an individual? That's critically important, particularly when this act of driving a car into a crowd motivated by racism and anti-Semitism looks like terrorism.
Clearly, this individual who's been charged now denied bond. Earlier this morning, he, at least in high school, his high school teacher says he was sympathetic to neo-Nazi thoughts. Do you have confidence the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department can really move forward effectively and get the job done?
Having served in the Civil Rights Division, I have total confidence in the career prosecutors in the Civil Rights Division and the career professionals in the Department of Justice. As was said earlier, the issue here are the political appointees. The issue here is the direction given by the Attorney General and given by the White House. And so the point being here is that if career prosecutors are allowed to do what it is that they have taken an oath to do, we'll get justice. But we need to hear from the top.
Because they clearly see this as a hate crime. Thanks very much, Cornell William Brooks, joining us. Coming up, the man spearheading the Russia probe is making some bold new moves. The New York Times reports that Robert Mueller wants to talk with key current and former Trump administration officials. So who is on the Mueller list? We'll have details when we come back. Special counsel Robert Mueller is now seeking interviews with key members of the Trump administration, including the former White House chief of staff Reince Priebus. That, according to the New York Times. The Times also reporting that as part of the investigation into Russia's efforts to influence last year's presidential election here in the United States, Mueller has already asked for details on specific meetings and is looking into President Trump's decision to fire the FBI director, James Comey. Our Shimon Prokopez is following all these developments for us. What else do we know, Shimon, about the latest developments in the investigation?
Right. So this story seems to indicate that they're now, Mueller's team, among some of the things they're now getting to is the obstruction. Key in this story is that it looks like Mueller and his team want to talk to Reince Priebus. And the significance of that is that Reince apparently had a meeting with Comey the week before Trump, the president, met with Comey and said, you know, let this investigation go, let the Flynn investigation go. The week prior to that, when Comey meets with Reince, Comey tells Reince, you know, this is inappropriate, you shouldn't be reaching out to the FBI, speaking to us directly. So the key there would seem that Mueller wants to see what did Reince relate to the president about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. In terms of the other parts of the investigation, the financial investigation, really we know a lot about Manafort, you know, the search warrant that was executed at his home. Depending on who you talk to, that sometimes means the investigation is near completion, or they may start to make some moves of an arrest or other things. But some are telling us, you know, they're still going through documents, they're still searching through the various other documents that they've received from banks, from corporations, from other companies that the folks within the Trump world were part of. So everything is still ongoing. There's no conclusion in sight. We don't see them moving on anything in particular right now, and the investigation is just still ongoing.
Any reaction from the White House so far?
No, you know, various people here at CNN have tried to reached out to the White House, and they have not responded to us. None of the president's attorneys, you know, other folks who have attorneys who are now still at the White House and have attorneys, they have not gotten back to us.
Clearly, Robert Mueller, the special counsel, he has not been intimidated by some of the criticism that's been leveled against him.
Yeah, no, if anything, he's digging in. And, you know, if you speak to people, and I've spoken to someone actually over the weekend who knows Mueller, who's worked for Mueller, so this is exactly the way he does things, you know, using a grand jury, using subpoenas, using search warrants. It's all part of how
the president is at a newly scheduled meeting with his attorney general
should be conducted.
And his new FBI director. They are investigating the death this weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia, as a possible hate crime
Jeff Sessions,
or
they had a
domestic
private
terrorism.
meeting with the President of the United States.
Sure
it could have been awkward, but talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, interestingly enough, if you notice, it was the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and the FBI Director who went there together. He did not seek to speak to the FBI Director alone, which would indicate perhaps maybe he's learned his lesson, that this is not appropriate, that he should not be reaching out to the FBI Director on his own.
It is like this.
Interesting. It is important that they both went there together and met with him and briefed him on the investigation.
Meeting with his new FBI Director right now. They promise
no cameras.
That's right, yeah.
All right.
Even in his own...
Awkward indeed. All right, thanks very much. Shimon Prokopez joining us. That's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back 5 p.m. Eastern in the Situation Room. In the meantime, the news continues right now, right here on CNN.